And she works a little while for Burning Man, which if you have not been, you need to look at your life and look at your choices. Here you go, Sarah. Oh.
Hello, excellent. Hello, friends. How is everyone? I don't know if you all know this, but there's like 400 of you and you all have eyes, and it's just terrifying. Are you? Never mind. Go on. My name is Sarah Day. I am here to talk to you today about a documentation adjacent topic that I have come to really appreciate for its importance in the last year. I like to geek out about UI text. I'm really fascinated by microcopy. I like interaction-driven content design, and I think really hard about whether sentences on screens should have periods at the end. Generally, I think they don't. My Twitter handle is scribblingfox. It's on all of my slides. You should follow me on Twitter because I mean, if you think I'm adorable and hilarious right now, I'm even more annoying over there. Today I'm going to talk to you about product and application copy. Okay, so I've worked in both documentation and content strategy. When I have my content strategist hat on, this is my mission. It's to inform, inspire, and empower users through elegant and scalable content. This sounds really sexy, right? Like, ooh, it says scalable in it. We love that word. But what does this actually mean? And more practically speaking, what am I talking about when I talk about application copy? So broadly, product or application copy is any text element in your UI that you write and that your users read. This is the landing page for Goodreads, which is a social networking site for book lovers that's owned by Amazon. And this is every element of product copy in Goodreads landing page. It's a lot, right? So it includes things like feature names, subtitle and description text, field names, placeholder text and button text, confirmations and error messages, and a lot more. It doesn't include things like user-generated variables, date and time stamps, author names, review text that a user actually writes, or more visual UI elements like this advertisement thing on the side here. So this is the part where some of you are like, is the bar open yet? Right? Why is this important, right? Like, I am a documentarian, or sorry, a technical writer and documentation enthusiast, if we're not using that term anymore. Like, you're talking about button text, and I have a team of like 10 docs writers, and I publish 50 FAQs every day, and my user base is brilliant, and I have seamless communication with my support team, and my knowledge base is, as the children say, on fleek. Like, who cares about placeholder text? Well, okay, I'm going to tell you something. Product copy is documentation for people who don't read documentation. Yeah, I know, right? That's it, thank you. No. Good copy is like preventative medicine for your product. With effective product copy, you can decrease user confusion, which decreases your support calls, and you can increase your user's sense of joy, delight, and safety in your product. Internally, effective product copy also helps you make better friends with your coworkers. It helps you identify inconsistencies in your product's workflow and also helps you foster good cross-functional communication. When everyone's using the same set of words to describe the same things, people understand each other a lot better. So it makes your company's life easier as well as your users' lives easier. Product copy is really different from technical documentation. There's overlap there, but there is a steep learning curve when I started writing product copy, so let me sum it up for you. Documentation generally requires you to take a more holistic perspective. You have to make assumptions about your users' backgrounds. You have to document a lot of edge cases. You have to try to cover as much content as possible. With product copy, your mission is a little bit more targeted. Rather than addressing everything, you need to focus really specifically on interactions and the choices that you want your user to be thinking about right now. So I have an agenda. It's nefarious. I'm going to talk through some best practices for people who want to get started writing product copy but really don't know where to start. Hopefully this will help you document any kind of app internally in its UI, no matter how terrified of failure you are, how inexperienced you are. Then I'm going to talk about some real-life examples of effective workflow management that are driven entirely by product copy. This is where we start getting into interaction design, which is something that I'm definitely not an expert in, but it's important to understand some of the fundamentals of if you want to write good copy. Then I'm going to discuss some enterprise class topics like internationalization and working cross-functionally. Okay, so let's get cracking on those best practices. There are some really simple philosophies you can embrace if you want to build a strong foundation for your product and application copy. So if you're a writer, you have a product full of features. None of them have really been documented with any sort of rigor. And you need to make decisions about both something as big as what you're going to call your next feature and something as small as what you're going to put in your button text. So where do you get started, right? Like, look at all this copy. Like, this is totally overwhelming. So this is where you start thinking about developing a system. So what's the first thing that happens to you on your first day at Hogwarts? They put the sorting hat on your head, and it tells you your destiny, right? Like, you're going to be a Slytherin or a Gryffindor or a brown coat or a Cylon or whatever. Anyway, your product copy is just like a group of first-year Hogwarts students. It needs to be sorted. To put it technically, every text element, every string in your product UI should have a predetermined purpose. So when you start thinking about this, it helps me to sort product copy into kind of 3 big questions. Every time you write a line of copy, it should answer at least 1 and sometimes 2 of these questions. What, how, and why? As a user, what does this do? How do I use it? And why should I care? So often, feature names and field names will tell you what. Placeholder text, button text, and walkthrough text will tell you how. And more marketing text, value props, or subtitles will tell you why. So writing is easier when you have a system. Every text element in your app can be sorted by these questions, and when you apply them to everything in your app, your life gets a lot easier. There's a couple of reasons why. One of them is user comfort. If you can have a holistic and complete approach to your application copy creation, your users will learn to look in certain places on the screen if they're trying to figure out if like a feature's use case is right for them. It's also a lot easier for you as the writer not to have to reinvent your UI copy plan from scratch every time a new feature ships, right? Like if your application starts to scale, you're not going to have as much time to spend on every single feature as more and more features are being developed and shipped. So if you have a plan, if you have like a system that you can apply to things before you even have to start writing, your life just gets a lot easier. This also sets up a framework for other people to do writing if you're not around, like PMs or designers or other writers. So, okay, let's get back to Goodreads. There are a lot of opportunities for product copy here, and like I said, a little overwhelming. But when we put the questions onto it, a pattern starts to emerge. So here are all the whats. Feature names, excuse me, I'm allergic to Portland. Feature names and field names, like browse, discussions, and currently reading, tell our users what they're looking at. Through word choice and also visual placement, this gives people a nice sense of place and location on the page. Placeholder links, placeholder text, links, and buttons are telling the user how they can interact with something. Note that a lot of these are verbs, right? Like, comment, preview, rate, search. All of these things are little cues that tell the user if they click on something, they can go deeper into your product and do something new. And there's even some why on this page. So this is my Goodreads landing page. This is my account, right? Down here at the bottom, you can see here is a sponsored book. It's a marketing thing. It says, this book has been shelved by members as fiction and historical fiction. I like those genres, and I have big shelves full of that content in my Goodreads account. So this is why I'm seeing this book recommended specifically, right? It looks more interesting to me because I know it's something that I am going to be curious about. So once you've got the purpose of your text elements figured out, it's time to start writing. And you can start writing just by following some simple guidelines. Product copy is extremely contextual. More so than documentation. It's extremely contextual. It's frequently time sensitive, it's often curated to a specific use case, and it succeeds mainly when it keeps your users engaged and curious about what's going to come next. So this is a Facebook status I posted a couple of weeks ago. I opened the mobile site on my phone and saw that friends had liked it, tapped in to read who those friends were, and all of a sudden this little button popped up at the bottom of the page that a friend is typing a comment. The little dots even danced along to show me that it was happening right now. So I thought this was really cool. This was a fun little piece of content design, right? It's very effective because it keeps my eyes glued to the screen. I really wanted to see what my friend had to say and who was typing, so I kept watching until the comment posted. The copy itself, you'll notice, is actually answering 2 of our 3 questions here. Obviously, you can see what is happening. A friend is typing a comment. But there's also some why here. And the word choice here is very important. I'm a lot more interested in one of my friends typing a comment than just someone. The fact that it says a friend is typing a comment is very engaging to me. And yeah, I really did see a man in the park blowing bubbles for his puppy. It was like super cute. So this tooltip is somewhat less helpful. If we take it apart, you can see the first sentence there, saves the changes to the selected profiles, a new profile, basically says the same thing as the title, doesn't really tell me anything new. This tooltip is supposed to tell you what happens when you click that green plus button. It also says new profiles appear within my profiles. I don't need to know that here. Like, what are new profiles, where are they, and why do I care about them? I don't. I'm just confused now, and that makes me sad. The better thing would have been for me to click on this and then to get a confirmation message that told me where I could find the new profile, right? So the problem with this tooltip is that it's not contextual enough. It's too broad. It gives me more information than I really need for this type of field, but I don't really get enough to tell me what I should be doing next. So when you write product copy, one of the things you need to do is help your users make choices. You need to tell them clearly what's about to happen in the right context that they can make an informed choice. Product copy is very interaction-driven, and so you need to give them clear indications of what actions they're about to take. This is actually a screenshot from my phone. A common example of this is button text. Useful buttons are really important when a user is about to take an action that's irrevocable, like deleting something. So here, Android is asking me to confirm that I want to delete a device folder. It uses that language. It says delete explicitly, even though it also says delete in the header line, because that emphasizes the action I'm taking. This is in line with Google's material design guidelines, which are really great. And it's a lot clearer than a simple like OK or got it, both of which feel kind of soft. So when in doubt, try to make your button content start with verbs. Verbs will tell your users what they're about to do. So when you think about writing small copy elements, precise word choice is really important. But more than precise, it also has to be accurate. And accuracy is a very subjective thing. So do you remember when the Apple App Store used to have a bunch of free apps in it? Yeah, Apple ended up getting sued over this button, like a couple of times. And why? Because free apps, arguably, were not really free. Adults would download these free apps to their phone, hand their phones to their kids, and their kids would rack up like 50 grand in credit card debt with extra lives in Candy Crush or unlocking mane and tail colors for their My Little Ponies or whatever. So the argument that Apple had to face in court here was that they had misled their user base by falsely representing these apps as free. The apps really are free, like they're free to download and they're free to use, but they don't really feel free. Like the cognitive dissonance between downloading a free app and then getting a $50 charge in the App Store for using it was too much for a lot of people. It was really frustrating. So Apple ended up refunding a lot of money because of how painful this user experience was and how understandable their users' confusion was. In most places, now the button says get. It's a little bit more ambiguous in terms of whether or not you're going to be asked to pay for something later, but it does speak directly to the user's experience when they interact with the button. You tap the word, you click the word, you get the app. It's simple. The takeaway here is that at critical interaction points, like installing an app, the user's experience is more important than your company's business drivers. It looks really good to be able to advertise a lot of free stuff, but it's not worth it when you think about the user frustration and potentially the legal fees that are associated with a misleading copy choice. So, technical writers, you know the song I'm about to sing here, right? When you're working in tech regularly, it's really easy to start thinking in more technical language, especially if you have a technical background yourself. You can't always assume your user base is going to be as technical as you are. Even technical products need to be understandable for the layperson or for a wider range of readers. The language that you choose has to reflect that. So don't talk about what the code is doing, talk about what the user's doing. Don't say request the app, say download. That's what the user understands. This is also true for jargon, both technical and geographical. I'm going to tell a personal story here. A few years ago, I was working at a company that made a high-security remote desktop product. We also had an iOS app. One of our iOS developers was trying to come up with a feature name for a feature he was developing. What happened was the app would take data from the user's phone, store it locally temporarily, and then when the user was on a Wi-Fi connection, pass it to the main server. This kept people from overriding their data plans with really huge file exchanges, right? So he was really obsessed with this idea of grabbing the data from the device and holding it. And the word he came up with to describe this was snatch. Yeah. So when his coworkers heard this, they were all too embarrassed and or laughing too hard to explain to him why this possibly wasn't the best word choice. So they said, Sarah, you're the writer, you tell him. And I'm like, let's go to Urban Dictionary. So seriously, we went to Urban Dictionary. If you've never used it before, look it up. It's urbandictionary.com. Whenever I'm thinking about putting jargon or colloquial language in my app, I pump it through Urban Dictionary to make sure it only means what I think it means. Yeah. So, I mean, the happy end to this is that the developer in question hadn't grown up speaking American English or Californian English, and so he just didn't know what the connotation of that word was, right? It was an honest mistake. But if we'd shipped it into production, maybe our user base wouldn't have responded so well to it. Okay, so let's shift gears. We've talked about some best practices that can help you make any element of product copy successful. These are the foundations, so let's go up a level. Product copy is not just feature names and placeholder text. It's also your most powerful tool for introducing ideas and concepts that are endemic to your product to new users. So if you use it correctly, product copy can help guide your users through workflows in a comforting, educational, and empowering way. The way that you master the art of giving precise instructions and workflows is by having a very intimate understanding of how those workflows work. You have to be able to anticipate not only what information the users will need, but when they need it, so when they go through that workflow, it feels seamless to them. Let's look at a couple examples of what I'm talking about. This is if this then that, which many of you have used. Many of us have done an onboarding workflow for a software or web app. It's pretty simple, your email and a password, right? The thing that I really like about this, and I'm sorry if the people in the back, maybe you can't see this well, there's a placeholder text here in the password field that says min 6 characters. This is a success criteria for entering in a password. I love this feature, right? Other apps, they wait for you to fail to set up a password and then tell you what the criteria are for doing it correctly. If this and that just does it right in the field, like right where you're typing, it's pretty much inescapable. This is an easy win for your users. It helps them feel smart and powerful because they don't screw up on the first step of using your app. So you click through, and for technical users, we all know that it's blue, it's underlined, it's a link. If you click it, something's gonna happen, right? For non-technical users, maybe it's not obvious to them. So there's this helpful text that says, click this to get started underneath it. Right? It's helpful, it's unobtrusive, it's easy to ignore if you know what you're doing, but it's absolutely critical if you don't. So the next step leverages text as well, helps get you through the process. There are graphical representations of these things here, common weather app, common email client, but there's also this caption. The caption's great because it actually gives you a sentence that if you read it out loud makes sense to you. If tomorrow's forecast calls for rain, then send me an email. Pretty clear, right? If this then that also uses its onboarding workflow to introduce common feature and product names to new users, right? So triggers and actions and channels and recipes, all of these things are completely systemic to if this then that's product. Triggers are behaviors, behaviors produce actions, combining the two gets you a recipe. You can even sum up the thing that you're seeing here with this get an email if there will be rain in your area tomorrow caption. The feature names that you see here are all over if this then that's product. So if you understand them, you're more likely to be successful. Understanding them completely is absolutely critical to user success. And because of this carefully designed workflow, all the new users who come to if this then that are familiar with these terms before they even start using the product. So this onboarding does a really good job of introducing behaviors and nomenclature with product copy. The result is a seamless onboarding that empowers users by educating them about how their product works. So let's look at another example. A lot of us have used GitHub to access code repositories for work or other projects. Their onboarding process is a great mix of contextual help and simple text fields. There's also some really smart marketing copy on this page, which I'm going to talk about in a second. It's really easy to educate yourself from each page of this onboarding workflow, but it's also easy to ignore the help if you already know what you're doing. So here's this marketing content I was talking about. If you're still looking for the what's, how's, and whys of each screen, these are the whys. Notice how they're using white space that would otherwise just be unoccupied to advertise the values of GitHub. This is a really great example of using marketing copy in a non-disruptive and helpful way. This is kind of what Apple could have done back when they were saying free and all those buttons. So up here at the top, there's another little nice perk. It's a step-by-step walkthrough of the onboarding process, which isn't just iconographic. There are also little text summaries of each step you're taking, which makes the onboarding itself seem a lot simpler. So there's some contextual help for each field, which again, it's easy to skim through and just miss if you know what you're doing already. Just fill in your username and password and go. But less technical users can actually get a lot of reassurance by reading this, and it's in a place that's very easy to reference when you're typing in that field. All this text is also a really nice accessibility feature if you have users who are using screen readers as well. So the next step is a simple choice between free and paid user levels. Notice how the value prop changes on the side to advertise the values of both sets of plans. This is an easy win for users who don't ever plan to pay for GitHub. It still makes them feel like they're getting something special. I want to call out one little bit of awesome contextual help here. Notice the button down at the bottom says Finish Sign Up, which implies pretty strongly that it's the last step in the workflow. But if you check that box that says Help me set up an organization, the button text actually changes to indicate that the workflow that you're engaging in is about to change. You're not finishing sign up anymore, you're continuing to set up an organization. It's a little cue that lets you know it's going to take a little bit longer than the initial workflow, right? I think this is really cool. Dynamic button text is a really great way to illustrate changes in backend behavior when your real estate's limited. They're a final way to show your users the choices that they've made and how they'll influence future behavior when they click. Okay, so when you're thinking about good workflow management, you also have to think about workflow disruption. Workflow disruption is anything that interrupts the action the user is trying to take. And generally, it's bad. It's confusing, and it also damages kind of user trust. It just doesn't look very professional to have kind of shoddy workflows. So Slack actually does very subtle workflow disruption very, very well, right? Their product is really flat, it's really easy to use, and their UI is designed to help facilitate conversations between you and other people. But if there's something they really need you to see, they give you a notification. Do you see it? How about now? Subtle, right? So if you click it, it expands a bunch of helpful content, including what I think is really cool, the latest reply to my help requests. Like right there, this is a great feature, right? But what's coolest about it is how lightweight it feels. It lets me concentrate on the things that I'm really trying to prioritize, like conversations with other human beings, without forcing me to see this. It doesn't take over my experience at all. And this all starts with a little notification. Okay, let's talk about something bigger. So if your product's scaling rapidly, there's a lot of new stuff to consider when it comes to product copy. Many of you have probably scaled content management systems to the enterprise, and content strategy scaling is similar, but there are some little quirks. So imagine your product is an adorable Tyrannosaurus. There comes a time in every product's life when it starts to grow and evolve. Maybe it evolves from a run-of-the-mill Tyrannosaurus to a Tyrannosaurus with a bow tie and umbrella. He's very dapper. It's never too early to start thinking about scaling your content strategy and how your content strategy is going to evolve as your product changes. If you don't do this early enough, the KT extinction happens and your Tyrannosaurus dies. It's really sad. If you do it well, however, you put yourself ahead of this wave of explosive growth that in small companies can come from a round of funding or an organizational pivot, or a big contract, like the next big customer. So if you don't do it, you set yourself up for a type of really heinous content and technical debt that affects every team in your organization and every line of content in your product. And I wish I was exaggerating, but I'm not. So we've already discussed how to create scalable processes, but you also have to consider as your product grows, how do you work cross-functionally with departments that are growing and changing as well? Unlike documentation, content strategy is often not very siloed. It touches on marketing, product development, design, support, all these other things. Most of us have probably worked with tightly siloed teams or been very tightly siloed ourselves as documentation writers, but one of the tasks of scaling a content strategy is to break those silos down as they start to evolve. You can't write copy in a vacuum, so you need to take responsibility for developing communication tools that work well for everyone, so you can develop the best content and copy together. So with so many different teams, each one with its own way of doing things, it's important that when you make up processes together, the processes you implement are transparent, meaning that they're documented somewhere, like in your wiki or on GitHub or tattooed on your arm, just like make sure everyone knows which arm. They're accountable, meaning that you sit down in a room with all the stakeholders involved and all of you agree on something together. You don't just make something up and tell them what you're going to do. And they're measurable, so your success criteria are clearly defined and hopefully in enough detail that if you make mistakes, you can change what you're doing a little bit to tweak your results. So effective cross-functional work is a requirement for good product content development, but beyond necessity, this is where it starts getting a little Machiavellian, right? Different teams in your organization have unique gifts that they can give you as you write. Engineers have insight into your company's entire code base. They can tell you what, where, and how often words and phrases appear in your product and how painful it'll be to change some of these things. Designers can help work with you to develop UI that is actually text-friendly, like modals that are big enough for help text or internationalized icon sets. Product managers can explain the business case for features to you, which helps you make effective word choice as you write. And the indispensable support and customer service teams are your direct line to user experience and customer pain if you don't have the budget to do testing yourself. You can give each of these teams back something in return for what they're giving to you. So, for example, you can give them editorial skills if your support team is writing FAQ articles. Like, I worked with a team that didn't publish anything because they were all really self-conscious about their writing skills. When I stepped in and just like copy edited the stuff they wrote, all of a sudden we started publishing all this stuff in our knowledge base, right? You can give designers early first drafts of copy that they can just like take to review sessions and not have to put lorem ipsum in everything. So as your organization scales, your little Tyrannosaurus, he starts wanting to learn new things. He starts thinking about maybe wanting to take a trip overseas. And all of a sudden it realizes it doesn't speak all of the languages in the world. And guess what? It's time to start thinking about internationalizing. Internationalizing is terrifying. It's very expensive. It's very hard to do well. And I'm going to tell you some best practices that hopefully will keep you out of the woods a little bit. So it's important to consider jargon and localized language when you write good product copy. I talked a little bit about this in the story where the developer wrote Snatch, but it's even more important when you're trying to write effective voice and tone in your product. It's very easy to slip into regionalized dialect to get when you're like looking for a certain emotional affect. So as a person from California, it's easy for me to go like, dude, that portfolio is hella sick, right? That looks awesome, yeah. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. Like that won't translate into Connecticut, much less into Italian or German. Instead, say something like, that portfolio looks great. It's warm, it's congratulatory, it's friendly, and it's universal. So when you start thinking about translating, frequently you have to start thinking about how much it's going to cost. Translation's super, super expensive, right? And often, I mean, as a writer, I don't think I've ever had the authority to make budgetary decisions about translating anything. But I know that I can bring a strong content game to the table when we start talking about cost because I can minimize the number of strings that we'll need to translate. So how you do this is a complicated topic, but the easiest way to start is just by pulling all the variables out of your lines of content. This leaves you with small reusable text chunks that you can translate once and repurpose for other things, rather than custom strings that need to be translated over and over again. So this first example is almost 10 words of translatable copy. 2 new people have viewed your profile, your manager Vikram and your colleague Annette. There's 5 variables in there that you need to translate, right? 2, manager, Vikram, colleague, and Annette. The second one has 4 words that need to be translated with no variables at all. It's a lot easier, it's a lot cleaner looking, and it's just like a lot easier to read. So, yeah. Okay, so let's recap. We talked about creating effective writing systems by identifying the use case for all the copy elements. We talked about writing to the user's experience rather than to the company's business drivers. We've talked about precise word choice. We've talked about workflow management, making your workflow accessible to all the users of your product, not just the advanced ones. We've talked about educating users and giving them the opportunity to pursue your copy without disrupting their workflows. And we have talked about some basic scaling practices like cross-functional communication and internationalization. I hope this has been helpful for you. At the very least, I hope it's been interesting. I hope you're all still awake. I'll be available for questions, I guess, like right down here under this monitor. Thank you very much. That's all I've got. Thank you.